I'm excited to announce this fireside chat. First, I'd like to introduce retired Air Force General Mike Holmes. And as all pilots, he's got a call sign, Mobile. So you might hear Dan refer to him as Mobile. You might hear him call him Mike.
Say it out loud once, you'll remember. Mobile Holmes.
Mobile Holmes. He 40 years of distinguished service as a decorated fighter pilot. He retired in 2020 as Commander, Air Combat Command, had served as Deputy Chief of Staff, Strategic Plans and Requirements, Vice Commander, Air Education and Training Command. And he's been the chairman of the board of Red 6 since 2021. We have been working together. I'm on the board there, and I can tell you that a lot of companies that are focused on dual use or DoD attempt to recruit and bring on board prior service senior ranking officers that have connectivity, knowledge, understanding of how the process works, and can help. And it's pretty fascinating to watch their evolution, because somebody mentioned earlier, Sean did, that when you meet these people that are typically some type of polymaths, right? They're able to do a whole lot of different things, but they don't know what a 409A valuation is, or some of the other minutia that's involved with venture capital. But when you watch them operate with a board that's either getting along or not getting along, that's where you see the real quality of the leadership training and their understanding of humans. And it's been fantastic to work with Mike over since 2021. Now, Dan Robinson. I think everybody might already know, have heard his call sign, Bond, like James Bond. And you'll hear him speak in a second. I don't know if he's 6'3"-ish. That is not a surgically dimpled thing, and that shadow is always there. I stay away from him in group photos. It's been phenomenal working with Dan. He was the first non-U.S. F-22 pilot in the non-U.S. citizen. He's since become a U.S. citizen. And he flew Tornadoes for Royal Air Force. And he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I think he grew up in a boxing gym also. So good to have on your side in a fight. We invested, after I first met Dan, in their Santa Monica airport hangar with an aircraft that had, I'm pretty sure, tape holding the propeller on. It was kind of pushed together in the corner, but Dan was incredibly compelling. Craig and I, when Craig came to town, went to their headquarters, which was a loft in Venice that you entered from the alley, and I swear I thought I'd walk into MacGyver's workshop. They had a helmet, I don't know what vintage, and they had 100-mile-an-hour tape. They had stuff, and it looked like a tool shop had exploded in there. Despite all that, we led their seed round and have been investing in them every round. They're from Fund 1, and we've also run a syndicate. And I'll let the two of them get to it and talk about Red 6. Thank you both, gentlemen, for letting me be a part of the ride.
Thanks, Kelly. I'd like to start off by thanking Kelly and Craig and Moonshots for the early investment and for the advice and counsel they've given Red 6 through the process. I'd also like to thank them and their sponsors for this great event and the chance to hear extraordinary leaders talk about what they're doing in this space. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. As Kelly said, my last job in the Air Force was as a commander of Air Combat Command down at Langley. And it was 2017, and the task I was given was to take our conventional fighter rescue command and control forces, bring cyber and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance forces, and merge them into that command, and transition our command from one that had been modified over the last 15 years to provide armed overwatch for forces on the ground and to fly in the stack over our national mission force while they went after high-value targets, into a force that could once again square off to control and exploit the air in great power conflict. One of the biggest problems we had is our lack of an ability to train realistically. We're limited in the hours we could fly because of aging airplanes and limited budgets, and we were limited in being able to recreate the threat environment that a peer adversary could put against us. So I was flying the T-38 as an adversary against F-22s at Langley, and they were forced to fly against themselves for their training. So half of their training was pretending to be an adversary. Only half of their training was dedicated to what we would call blue air training. And their other adversary was a 75-year-old trainer that hadn't been modified since the 1960s, and that was the training environment they were in. So they could train in a simulator that could come closer to replicating that threat, but without the risk and the physics-based environment of finding out how things really work in an airplane and the high stress you're under as an operator there. Or they could train in the air, where they could do that part, but they couldn't have a realistic threat to train against. So we were struggling with those problems. I was made aware of a little company out in California that had, this crazy idea that through augmented reality we could bridge that gap and we could bring realistic threat training into the air without paying for adversary air, which is very expensive, or without trying to recreate the density and capability of, say, a PRC threat environment that would have to fight against. And, I was skeptical. I went out and got a chance to meet him, and that started my relationship with Dan and his company and Red 6, who has proposed really a novel approach to addressing that problem. But as we've gone deeper into it, we found out that as you start to solve that specific augmented reality part, now you capture reams and reams of data that were not available to us to analyze what pilots do and how they think and how each pilot's capabilities are in the environment and where their weak areas are. And then that data translates into being able to operate in the command and control environment outside of training, but in real combat. So we continue to find these layers. Dan's a lot of things. You heard Kelly talk about him. Certainly a great communicator, certainly a great visionary. I've really come to see that his extraordinary talent is as an extraordinary leader. And Dan, why don't you tell us about Red 6 and what makes it unique?
Well, thank you, General Holmes. I kind of feel weird being up here being interviewed by a four-star general. So I get what you're talking about, interacting with these guys, right? Kelly and Craig, love you guys. Thank you for having me back, and nice to see everyone again. Some of you will have heard a little bit about this story. It occurs to me as two fighter pilots sitting up here on stage, we are heavily outnumbered by the Army here. And so I'm acutely aware of that. But I'll use that as a sort of leaping off point as to really articulate what I was thinking about in terms of how we think about the threat and why what we're doing is so relevant. And I think, look, for the last 30 years or so, from the perspective of air, we have operated with impunity from threat of attack from above, right? And as difficult and as amazing as the work we've done out in the Middle East and theaters around the world, we've always had what we'd refer to as air dominance. So that's really important. And the landscape has changed. And as we start to think about the peer threat now, we're faced with the prospect of actually going into theater and being presented with a problem set where we have to once again go get control of the skies before we can do anything. And indeed beyond that to control of space and cyberspace in a multi-domain environment. So we obviously want to be able to prevail in that threat, but we prevail by initially deterring it. And to deter, we need to train. Because if we're training, we're lethal, and we need to put it in no uncertain terms that if a potential threat was to go against us in the domain of air or space or cyber, it is just not worth it. We're too good. And as General Holmes was saying, we were failing at that threat. And the traditional ways we train pilots, again, outdoors, flying in airplanes, or we go in simulators, and outdoor training in airplanes is the way we need to do it, but we didn't have the pilots, we didn't have the assets, and we didn't have the dollars to solve the demand signal. And simulators have a really good role to play in training fighter pilots, but they fundamentally can't emulate the cognitive loads that we're under when you're flying an airplane that will kill you in the blink of an eye and you're traveling at high speeds pulling 9Gs. So it's really essential we need to train. What I identified was a gap that I thought sat in the middle between live flying and simulation. And the simple question I asked myself was, could I drag simulation outdoors? And could I create simulated worlds outdoors up in the sky that we train against? So to double down on that, what I mean is real pilots in real airplanes going up into the environment, but dropping down into a system that I wanted to create that would allow us to look out and see a threat environment to include ground threats and air threats that are not really there, driven by rendered by augmented reality and driven and controlled by advanced artificial intelligence. And that was the thesis I promised. I don't know if you ever read the book or saw the movie Ender's Game. But if you ever see that, Ender Wiggin is a young kid that's recruited to a military academy, and he's groomed and trained in advanced simulations. And the drop at the end of the movie is he's called to go attack a simulated alien environment, and he wipes out an entire species. And he does it unknowingly because he's actually still in that. He thought he was in the simulated environment. When I saw that, that was the genesis of what I thought it was we were building at Red 6. We need to be able to train against advanced threats at scale, at a cost-effective solution every single day of the week, and we will never do it using physical assets. So this vision is enormous. It is really, really difficult. We stupidly have picked perhaps the hardest thing to do in the military. We're developing hardware, software, we're putting it in fast jet airplanes attached to human beings that are strapped to ejection seats. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. But the technology is working. We're in our first Air Force platforms now as we speak, and going through test. So maybe that's a good point to stop.
Okay, and for our friends that are here with us, Dan has led the company starting with SIPR Phase 1 funding through the process. SIPR Phase 1, SIPR Phase 2, SIPR Phase 3, a TACFI award, and then this year we received a maximum StratFi award. So we've worked that process with a lot of help. Yeah. And then he ran through the seed round funding, where we started with moonshots through a Series A and a Series B to build the room that he needs and to be able to turn the idea into prototypes, and then the prototype into products that can be spread across the Air Force, really, and across partner Air Forces, and then beyond. Dan, growing up in the northern UK, we've talked some about that. As a boxer, taking that into becoming a fighter pilot in the RAF and then the U.S. Air Force, going home and working on your dad's construction business and turning that around and learning what it takes to do that, building that airplane that Kelly talked about and assembling the team and the knowledge it takes to do that, and finally to Red 6, where you're pulling all these things together from raising customer money, raising VC money, finding the tech talent, working through a government-customer relationship. What do you see, what leadership traits have been common to you across all those different areas, and what do you see as most important?
It's a great question. You forgot that I started life as a milkman. That's how I got my start. As you said, I grew up in a coal mine, effectively in the northeast of England, and wanted to fly from being a kid. So the only way out of that was to earn money, to take flying lessons, to get myself to the Air Force through a scholarship, which is what I did. It's interesting that the military leadership, central to Craig and Kelly's thesis, is investment in veterans because of the amount of leadership training we get in the Air Force and beyond. And I have this really unique perspective of coming from the UK to our cousins here in the US and experiencing leadership on both sides of the ocean, albeit doing a very similar job. For the Army guys in here, you probably look at us and you see Top Gun and all that kind of stuff, and you think we just whiz around in jets and go to the merge and have dogfights and all that kind of stuff and play volleyball, and it's all absolutely true. But what perhaps people don't realize is that we are trained certainly at the fighter weapons school to an extremely high standard of looking at complex mission sets and bringing effects to bear, not just in the domain of air, but across the joint force as well. And so having seen that on both sides of the ocean and witnessed leaders such as General Holmes, the absorption of all of those skill sets was a significant part of my education. I think when you're flying a fighter jet, one of the things that I often think about, and it goes back to what you were talking about of love, I think there are three central tenets that I identify to leadership that I try to stress. One is mutual respect. The second one is mutual trust, absolutely. And the third one I often refer to as mutual regard, which is, in essence, loving people. And as we were sitting here about to go up, I looked at General Holmes and I thought about, sitting in an F-22 as we're getting to the visual merge, and you're looking to your right, and 2 miles away, you're going in at 1,000 miles an hour, and these guys are coming at you, and you look to your right, and you see your wingman, and you see his airplane start to turn in, and he's doing exactly what you're doing in the cockpit, and you're ready to go fight and kill together. And looking across at that individual, it's hard not to feel mutual respect, mutual trust, and mutual love. And those things are really, really important to me as a leader. Some of you know this story. Having got out of the Air Force in 2009, I went to business school here at Georgetown, and coming out of that, I went to New York and worked in finance, which is a very different cassette, an experience and backdrop that I got to see. And it was everything I realized I did not want to be as a leader in that industry. To sit in a cubicle in New York City with a bunch of finance guys sapped my soul. But it was another interesting cassette in the leadership playbook, and I genuinely mean a formative part of my education, and seeing the antithesis of what I recognized and saw in the military, which was selfless, servant leadership, sacrifice, and doing things for the greater good. It was the antithesis of that. Then in end of 2011, I get a phone call that would change my life. I told you I grew up in the coal mine in the north of England. Some of you will have heard this story. And I get a phone call from my dad to tell me that his business is in fact going bankrupt at the time, and asked me if I would come home to help. And on my way back to the UK to help my father, he committed suicide. And in the wake of that, I am now back where I grew up in this village in the northeast of England. I walk into a business that is basically bankrupt in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, having just lost my father to suicide, and I had 200 employees that were staring at me going, what do we want to do? How are we going to do this? And I realized at that point in time that, and I'll get back to this Ferris wheel concept that you beautifully articulated, Steve Jobs in his, talks about connecting the dots in his life, and at some point it's hard to know what you're going to do in the future, so you have to buy into a vision and chase something with all your passion, knowing that at some point in the future those dots will connect, and you'll look back and you realize you're at the right point at the right time with the right experience, skill sets, and maybe connections and education to capitalize on the opportunity that's in front of you. And the moment my dad died and I was transplanted, I looked back at this synthesis of cassettes I'd had from the Royal Air Force to the United States Air Force to business school to finance, and I realized that I was in the right place at the right time where those dots connected for me. The question was, looking in the mirror, did I have the character to do what was being asked of me? And so to the point on the Ferris wheel where you're going all around and sometimes you're on top and sometimes you're down here, I was absolutely in a foxhole at that point, at the very bottom of the Ferris wheel, looking at this team around me going, how am I going to lead you out of this? And the way I led the people out of that thing was through what I refer to as, we know in the military, servant leadership. So I looked at this room and I said, hey, everyone, I know how to get us out of this predicament. Pinocchio, I had no idea how to get us out of this predicament. But I said, well, it's going to involve sacrifice. So, hey, apprentices, you're going to sacrifice. Your managers will sacrifice more than you. Your directors will sacrifice more than you, and I will sacrifice more than anyone else. And on a personal level, for 5 or 6 years, I sacrificed an immense amount. Having gone from single Raptor pilot living in New York City, I was now living at home with my mom in my mid-30s, taking care of her and leading the turnaround of a business. So a fascinating education that takes me to the end of that. We ultimately got to an exit in 2018, just as I started thinking about the genesis of Red 6. So as I approach Red 6 now, I have the synthesis of a very disparate set of experiences that I ultimately think build my perspective on how I like to lead at Red 6. But it comes back to mutual respect, mutual trust, and mutual regard, loving the teammates. And I stress culture above all else. Red 6.
Well, you can tell we were both really enamored with Sean's talk and the way he talked about making this leap. I appreciate being introduced as a retired four-star general, but when I've been out in this 4 years since I retired, interacting in the business world and learning something about how it works, the first thing I've learned is that the way America solves problems is by somebody has to make some money off of it. That's our strength. And we're not going to beat China by being China. We're going to beat China by figuring out ways to bring new tools and capabilities to market to our warfighters, and somebody's going to make some money off of those. The other thing that when I'm talking to people, they say, well, General Holmes, it's different out here. In the Air Force, you could just give an order and people ran around and did what you want. And maybe if we're getting shot at, but 99% of the time, anything that happened was because they were convinced that's what they had to happen. It's not any different in the military environment than it is anywhere else. People have to be convinced and they have to believe, and it comes down to that love between people that Sean talked about. Great joy of being part of Dan's board and being the chairman of the board, and one of the things that goes with that is I get to listen to him. I get to be a sounding board when he's working through the issues and working through the challenges that he has and the Ferris wheel that Sean talked about, and I can tell you that I was surprised to learn outside of the military how much time was spent on people problems. I thought that was kind of unique to us. In the military, you have the people that are issued to you, right? You're not going to get any more. You can fire them, but there's not going to be anybody else. So your job is to develop the people you have, try to find a place they can be successful, and build the best team you can with what you have. I've seen in the business world more of a tendency to, Gary, if Gary's not the right guy, see you, Gary. Let's find somebody that's the right guy. There's not necessarily a lot of development time that goes into it. In a startup, and when you're working through putting these capabilities together, it's a surprising amount of coaching, that has to happen, and working, trying to find the right people for the right jobs. As you ride that Ferris wheel, the people that were the right people for your initial year are not the right people as you start to grow, and you have to find ways to reward them for what they did, but find the right people to take you forward. Dan, how much time do you think you spend on people problems, on people issues as the CEO at Red 6?
I mean, it goes through fits and starts, but I would say, 90% of my time is really spent dealing with people. And as the company grows, I'm sure this will resonate as founders in here. You spend 90% of that 90% of your time working upwards, dealing with a board more often than not. I think, obviously people are central to the success, and the way I like to think about managing people and balancing that against the needs of the business, there are three things that I think we're constantly solving for as leaders and founders of companies. That is the need of the team, balanced against the need of the task at hand, balanced against the need of the individual. And if you think about that as a Venn diagram, you try as a leader to sit in the middle of those three things and balance as effective as you can over time. The best leaders I've seen, however, know that on a day-to-day basis you balance there, but when the time calls for it, you bias very aggressively to what needs to be done. So if it's task, guys, I need you to pull back-to-back 24-hour shifts, and we're not going to sleep until this is done because there's a deadline, and I know I'm asking a lot of you, but we're just going to go do it. The best leaders know when to go to the extremes of one, but then the more sophisticated ones know when to come back and get back to that balance over time. But the most nuanced leaders that I've ever seen recognize that ultimately to lead over time, it is about balance over time. So what I like to think about in terms of managing people is, if I go out to the extremes of, I'm going to ask a tremendous amount of you over this month, I will come back to the normal Venn diagram, balancing it over time, but I will never forget that I've been out to that extreme. And when the time affords me and I've got the opportunity, what I tend to do is then go back out here without notice to say, I'm going to reward individuals, I'm going to reward the team. And it's an imperfect science and art, but over time I try to balance that, and that's kind of the model I'm constantly floating around in my head over time is, am I getting it about right? And I screw it up a lot, but on balance, that's what I strive for, and I think that's how you generally will take people with you on a journey over time.
Thanks for that. Dan and I have had a chance the last year or so to do several kind of fireside talks, and as the company grows and as we talk to people, we tend to spend more time, talking about the vision, talking about what might come next, talking about how we will work to get our product out there. Sometimes I think we don't talk enough about the amazing technological solution that Red 6 is offering. Partly, you want to protect your intellectual property and you want to think about competition, but I can tell you that being a skeptic, again, getting in an airplane, and when I grew up in F-15s in the 1980s, my commanders said things like, fighter pilots are made with the engines running and the canopy down. What that meant was nothing matters except what happens in the airplane. Everything else is interesting, but it doesn't really matter. Another commander said, I'm not sure what the difference is between simulators and real airplanes, but I know I've flown into the ground lots of times in simulators and I never have in a real airplane. So there's something different. And there is something different. But I can tell you, when you rejoin on Red 6's augmented reality KC-46 for the first time, and you see an F-22 on the wing, and you move around that formation, and it feels like it does when you take another airplane up to the tanker and you drop down under the receiving area onto the tanker, and you see the lights on the bottom that are used to direct an airplane into the right place, and those things look real, you start to buy into it. When you go and maneuver against a depiction of a People's Republic of China J-20 that's powered by an AI algorithm that's reacting to what you do with your stick and rudder inputs and is actually fighting you in the same way a person does. You hit the believe button, and pretty soon you're sweating and grunting and trying to figure out how you're going to scrape away and beat this augmented reality J-20 that's trying to get behind you and gun you. And when we put other aviators in there, you know, I always want to talk to them and see how it does. I got the chance as ACC commander to do a lot of cool things, and one of them was visit the virtual reality lab out at Stanford, where they're, you know, leading the research on what it takes to make those things work. And the idea is, you know, how realistic does it have to be before you buy into it? It doesn't have to be 100% realistic. It has to be enough that you buy into it. And I can tell you this technology does. And when you throw somebody in there, they buy into it very rapidly. You want to talk about that at all and how you got there and what the problems were?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, Kelly and Craig, when they first came around to look at us, and Kelly came to the hangar, we'll call it a hangar, Kelly. They came in and we had a great meeting, and I thought they were going to invest, and then they came back to me and said, yeah, we're not going to invest. And I was frankly pretty devastated at the time. And I remember going to the football field with Grant, and you broke the news to me, and maybe you bought me an ice cream or something to console me. It was like, and they were quite right not to invest, because what we were proposing was frankly outrageous, right? So augmented reality as an industry has been much maligned over the past 5 to 10 years, namely because of some notable failures, such as Magic Leap and Microsoft and things like that, which have really struggled, although you've seen Apple launch the Vision Pro recently. But the reason they failed, it's a nascent industry, but there's a lot of technical problems that go into making augmented reality work. But fundamentally, the solutions on the market today are indoor solutions only. And if I can step outside of what it is we're doing right now inside for the DoD and the vision that I believe in, I think augmented reality over time represents the single biggest inflection point in how we will ultimately share and interact with digital content since computers went to cell phones. But for that to be realized, it has to be ubiquitous. And for it to be ubiquitous, it means it has to be mobile. And for it to be mobile, it has to work outside in a form factor that you're willing to wear on your head, like the glasses on your head, right? And then you have to solve a potent cocktail of problems like CPU and GPU and battery power and all sorts of stuff with it. So from a hardware perspective, that future is still 10 to 15 years away. The reality is the tech is just not there. But even if the tech was here right now, what could we truthfully say, hand on heart, as consumers, we would use that technology for? I haven't been able to definitively answer that question yet. So what we've found, and the elegance of what we've done here, and when we looked at the problem, we found a problem inside of the DoD that, yes, we're starting with the domain of air, but ultimately it scales to the joint force, because I think synthetic worlds outside that you're training in are the future. When I was a kid growing up in the northeast of England, I used to run around with a stick in the woods, right, playing soldiers. Kids these days, they're sedentary, they're indoors playing video games. I think the future is the blending of the synthetic world with the real world outside, and that's the North Star, but there's a way to get there. The elegance of what we've done is we found a problem set that is so acutely defined for the US military that it's only augmented reality can solve it, right? Only augmented reality can solve it. And in doing that, we've given augmented reality a home. So we're solving a problem that actually really matters. There are a bunch of challenges. We're doing it outdoors in bright blue sky, white cloud background, up in the sky at 1,000 miles an hour going upside down. It's an immensely difficult hardware problem to solve. Having solved the hardware problem, we then get into the software and how do we think about the AI algorithms that present the problem sets that we're training against. So it's a complex, really difficult hardware-software solution. But ultimately, initially it was a behemoth of a boulder to get rolling. But rolling it is right now, and we're starting to see this really look good as a technology, and we're excited with the future holds with it.
When you think about operators across the military, Dan and I grew up as fighter pilots. You know, there are certainly a lot of tough operational skills. When people ask me, you know, what's the unique part of that? What are you trying to train people? Why is it so hard? I usually tell them that at least for a fighter pilot, the idea is that you take someone, and the ones that stand out from the rest of the crowd are people that can take information from multiple two-dimensional sources and put it together in their head into a three-dimensional picture. So in the F-15 that I learned how to fly, I had a radar warning receiver, I had a map, and I had to put all those things together with my, no matter which way I was facing, maybe I'm turned away from the threat, I don't have those pictures anymore, maybe I'm heading and I have a two-dimensional picture. Keep up with the threat, keep up with my teammates, and put all those together and operate in that space. One of the things we've learned that this technology does for us is can do a lot of that for you. So imagine yourself, wearing a headgear with a wide field of view visor that matches, the limit of your eyes to look left and right and up and down. You have a display that's able to show you not just an augmented reality threat, but show you where everybody on your side is. Tactics have evolved in the fighter world. We don't fly a mile apart anymore. F-22, F-35 guys maybe fly 10 miles apart, where you can't see each other anymore, but you need to keep up with where your partners are and what they're doing. Imagine this world where, Red 6 does that for you. And now you don't have to train as exquisitely, and you don't have to have that, 1 in 100 people that's really, really good at that. You can take a broader cross-section of people, and you can bring that across. What else is out there in your vision?
Yeah, look, I think the elegance of the solution, as we go back to this movie Ender's Game and the vision that I've often articulated to you is, as we think about building simulated training environments outdoors, if we get this right, this helmet, this hardware-software solution, these training environments that we're going out to train in every single day of the week should look and feel like the real threat environment. And that's critically important, because when we go to do the job for real, as Mobile talked about, if we're wearing the same helmet, now as we penetrate contested, highly adversarial airspace, let's say in a theater a long, long way from here, where it's a complex electromagnetic spectrum, that same helmet is able to render the battle space for you. So I can look out through this helmet and I can see the electromagnetic spectrum. I can understand when kinetic effect is going in. I can understand when non-kinetic effect is going in. All of this stuff we've had to process in our brains before. And if we get it right, the only difference when the guys and girls go to do it for real is that it's real stuff flying back at you. And that's what I think it is we're building. The final thing I'd probably like to talk about is, by virtue of the solution or the efficacy of the solution we've had to create to draw so accurately to pilots, it allows us to extract a data set from the pilots that's immensely valuable as well, and start to understand why fundamentally human beings make the decisions they make when they're under duress. So for us as instructors, in the debrief, when we come down and we're analyzing, we go to the nth degree of detail to understand why generally we've screwed something up and what went into those decisions. And inevitably, there's a degree of subjectivity in that analysis. We'll now know more, because with this technology now, we can take it into the debrief and go back into a virtual environment, and now we can refly the exact sortie we've just done up in the air but on the ground, and I can stop and I can understand, hey, General Holmes, at this point in time you made this decision. Did you have full situational awareness at the time, and what were you doing? General Holmes will say, yes, of course I had full situational awareness at the time. And I can look in because I can see where he's looking, and I can say, well, actually, I think you're telling me fibs, because I don't even think you were looking in the right place at the right time. And also the analysis of the data through things like eye tracking can start to understand things as fundamental as what is the cognitive load on the human brain at that point in time. Why were they task saturated, and what is causing them to become task saturated? So that level of analysis allows us to debrief in a really, really effective way to a granular level that informs decisions as fundamental as what makes a good fighter pilot and where do we go find and recruit these kids from an early stage in life. Because the role of a fighter pilot is changing. As more and more information is coming into the cockpit, it's, that we kind of span the days of like the old gunslinger flying around at 1,000 miles an hour and going for a fist fight up in the air to now with systems managers and platforms like F-22 and F-35, where we're taking massive amounts of information and everything in between. But the role of fighter pilots is changing, and it's heavily anchored in data and the ability to make good three-dimensional comprehended decisions.
Thanks.
General, quick question. We have video, but I don't know if you're okay with us showing it yet.
I haven't seen the video.
It's from Freak.
Oh, he sent it? Sure, it'd be good to see. I haven't seen it.
All right. Okay, everybody.
Roll the film.
Pay attention. Look up.
that's what we're building.
Hey, Dan, one quick question. One that I get often is a company like Shield AI, right? Who's a little louder. A company like Shield AI that is AI pilots moving into hardware, right?
Yep.
Drones,
Yep.
and I think the Secretary of the Air Force is about to go up and plane flown by Shield AI software. How do you respond to that potential?
It's a really important question, and there's twofold. There's the operational side of it, and then there's the training side of it. So let me deal with the operational side of it first. There is no doubt in my mind, and General Holmes can talk to this, that the future will involve unmanned platforms, but they will absolutely be working in conjunction with human beings in platforms. As anyone that knows anything about AI will tell you, AI is really good for certain things, and it's less good for other things. Human beings are better at certain things as well. So whilst I accept that unmanned platforms are coming and they're going to be a part of the battle space, the real question is, how do we think about the interface between human beings and AI-driven unmanned platforms as well? And that's a really interesting one. General Holmes talked and alluded to it there, but the system we've built is a really compelling solution for the UX, UI between human beings in manned platforms controlling unmanned platforms. And so that intersection between the two is where I think we've put less thought into in terms of how the two are going to operate together. So that's the first thing I'd say, and I think there's an enormous role for augmented reality in that platform. The second thing I would say is this, and I think this is really, really important. The role of a fighter pilot it's a really difficult job, right? We are working at the limits of certainly of my ability. He's probably way better than me, but of my ability as a human being, my brain was fried, overloaded, trying to process the vast amounts of information coming into the cockpit at high speed, and let alone think about formations. It's like three-dimensional chess played at high speed. To do that, you need to train. You need to train frequently, you need to train effectively, you need to train relevantly as well, and we're failing as it stands. Now you're going to ask a fighter pilot to go up and work in conjunction with a bunch of drones that are on your, or unmanned platforms that are on your wing as well. And so we need to be able to train at that. So this is my contention. Whilst we've thought a lot about the concept of operations of humans and machines working together, what we haven't thought really a lot about is how do we train at scale. And much like the way we fly airplanes with missiles, we don't fly missiles every single day of the week because we haven't got enough. We'll beat them up every time you fly them, so you leave them in a box and you pull them out when you need to fly and train against them. Well, what is an unmanned aerial vehicle? It's essentially a chunk of aluminum or a composite flying through the sky, and it's controlled by an AI algorithm. So central to that AI algorithm is the ability for human beings to build trust between humans and AI. Well, to do that, you need to be able to train repeatedly in scalable fashions to the relevant threat. And we just haven't got the platform. So when all of these CCAs or unmanned vehicles arrive, they're going to be in boxes. But how do we train to them? We need to be training to them again every day of the week in a de-risked environment that is representative of the threat. Well, what's a surefire way to do that? In a synthetic environment outdoors. So I actually think the opposite of CCAs being a threat to what it is we're proposing. I think we offer a solution that is absolutely essential for us to be able to train with CCAs and certainly representative AI algorithms of how they behave every single day of the week, at every base, at scale, to a relevant threat. And that's how I think about it.
Yeah, one of the challenges of CCAs and autonomous vehicles will be getting the right data set for them to train against, in the same way that we can't replicate that threat for a pilot in an F-22 to go face against it. We can't replicate that threat in the real environment for a CCA either to go train against. So they're going to have to train in a simulated environment to train the algorithms to work those. I think you'll see pilots' assistants, which we have already had in airplanes that do some of the work for a crew and then hand them solutions that they can select or not select or can fine-tune or not fine-tune. And I think it'll be a process. We joked and said in ACC we would like to go with some unmanned adversaries and train against them and see how they do training against us. And on the day when they win all the time, then we'll know we shouldn't be buying manned airplanes anymore, that the time has come. And the time may get there, but there's some steps along the way, we believe. And as Dan said, if you're not going to train those CCAs in the real environment, then you don't really want to pull them out of the box, because now you have to pay O&M, you have to pay the fuel to operate them, you have to repair them when they break. You'd like to be able to train their algorithm in a simulated environment, and then when those fighter pilots actually have to go fly, maybe a couple times a year, you pull the CCAs out of the boxes at red flag, and you try the whole thing together. The rest of the time, you train with a augmented reality representation of that CCA.
There's another interesting nuance. So the AI that's driving that experiment, I believe it's actually Epicise, that, or maybe it's Shields as well, but they're both in different versions of the same thing. We're flying with that exact AI in ATARs every single day of the week, the same thing we're flying against. And the nuance and the thing to consider in training is the AI is informed with perfect information about what the host aircraft is doing and can react and fly in accordance with that. That's not going to be the same for real, right? So before the AI can make a decision and prosecute it, it has to fully understand what the adversary is doing, which means it has to sense it, be it optically, through radar, whatever it is. And unless that information is perfect, it's going to be difficult for the AI. So I still think we have a way to go when it comes to that type of stuff as well.
Thank you, Dan. Always a pleasure. Kelly, I think we're out of time.